Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 19th episode of Dose of Derm, a dermatology guide for medical students. My name is Emma Holjak.
And my name is Iryna Savinova, and on today's episode, we will be interviewing Dr. Kerri Purdy.
Dr. Purdy is an associate professor of medicine and the division head in the Division of Dermatology and Cutaneous Sciences at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Dr. Purdy also has a full-time academic practice in Halifax.
After receiving her medical degree, Dr. Purdy completed her residency training in internal medicine, followed by dermatology at Dalhousie University, and has completed fellowship examinations in both specialties. She is the past president of the Canadian Dermatology Association and host of the Dermalogues podcast, the popular CDA residence podcast. And without further ado, we are excited to introduce to you all Dr. Purdy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so
Thank
much for being here.
And to start us off, we were wondering if you could share a little bit about your medical school journey and what your path was like in terms of finding and pursuing dermatology.
Sure. Yeah. And it wasn't sort of the traditional path that you may hear from people that were interested in derm from day one. So, um, I guess growing up, I thought I'd be a lawyer. I really like to argue. I had a great science teacher in junior high, decided that science maybe was the way to go, went to medical school. During medical school, I kind of liked everything except for a few things. I knew I wasn't going to be an obstetrician or a psychiatrist, but I had an intention to go into internal medicine to do intensive care, which I did internal medicine. In my second year, you had to do a selective, and I kind of thought, "Nah, I'll do dermatology. It'll be pretty quiet, a bit of a rest." And then determined while I was on rotation that this was really awesome. I had never been exposed to it. I actually really liked it, and then kind of changed paths. And fortunately, back then, a few years ago, you were still able to do a subspecialty match to dermatology at Dalhousie after internal medicine residency. So that's how I got into derm.
That's very cool and definitely different than what we've heard so far, because I know that that's not really a path that people pursue anymore, which is an interesting thing on its own. And now that you're in dermatology, how are you liking your practice? Can you share a little bit about what that looks like in your day to day?
Yeah, for sure. So I think you guys mentioned in the intro that now I'm doing total academic practice, which is great. For the first 10 years of practice, I did sort of a mixed. And so I spent probably about 70% of the time in the community, 30% of the time at the academic center here in Halifax. For a couple of years, I lived in Ottawa and did the same type of breakdown. And then 3 years ago, I moved full-time academic. There's pros and cons, which I'm happy to talk about in depth if you guys want. But the thing that I really like about it, especially with the medicine background, is it allows me to kind of do complex cases and spend a bit more time and be based in the hospital with the residents full time, which really keeps one on their toes. And so I just basically see everything in general medical dermatology. As the division head, I have a bit of protected time for that to do the roles that are required. And then otherwise, the usual stuff, teaching, call, etc.
Do you have a favorite part of the roles that you've been a part of? Ranging from being division head or being the CDA president, is there anything that is particularly that stands out that you love to do?
Um, that's a really hard question to answer. I think because with leadership roles come a lot of opportunities, but also come a lot of challenges and come things that you maybe aren't expecting. And I think the same can be said for the CDA president role as well as the division head role. There are things that I maybe wasn't expecting to have to encounter, which have really given me skills moving forward to be in other leadership roles. But I think there's certainly some challenges there. Probably my favorite role was the program director, just because you got that one-on-one with all the residents and you really got to see on the daily what kind of an impact you could have on the future generation of dermatologists.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, I was curious. So you're in Halifax now. Did you do your training there, like medical school and everything, or was
Mm.
that somewhere you moved later in your career?
No, I'm born and raised in Halifax, so I just haven't I've had failure to launch basically from the city. So this is home for me. I did undergrad, medical school, and residency all at Dalhousie.
That's really cool though, because I feel like then since you got to do all your training there, you probably understand the community so well where you're practicing and things like that, which I'm sure helps.
Yeah, I will say that it's nice in dermatology to know people in other areas of medicine. You know, we do work collaboratively with so many other specialists on a regular basis, from surgeons to pediatricians to family physicians to other medical specialties, infectious disease, rheumatology, et cetera. And so I think it's nice knowing a lot of those people. When I lived in Ottawa, that was a bit of an uphill challenge getting to know them. But then once you had the group of people that you knew, everyone was also very welcoming and it was nice. But I will say, you do have a bit of a leg up already knowing people and having done training with them. It makes it easy to pick up the phone and ask a question, which I do a
That makes
lot.
And speaking of how you're actually our first guest from Halifax, we were also wondering if you could tell us a little bit and our listeners as well about the dermatology residency program at Dalhousie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, actually, a lot of people, I don't think it's the case anymore because Dal has been an established CARMS entry for a number of years, but Dal has had a dermatology training program for a really long time. And so previously, it would be people that would have done the rotating internships and they spend some time here. And actually, we had a collaborative situation with the University of Ottawa where people would go for a year for part of the derm training. Then there was a whole cohort of people like myself who did subspecialty training after internal medicine training. And then about 10 years ago, we had our first CARMS position and have had 1 to 2 residents basically every year since then. I think the pros of the DAL program are that it is quite small, and we often see that in our letters. You know, we love your small and cohesive program, and you're all a family and a team. Kind of, but it does really allow us as staff physicians to be aware of strengths and maybe some areas of opportunity for our residents and our learners. And so you can really provide that. It also allows them to work closely with staff and get a sense of, how does this person approach this? And they feel very comfortable asking us those questions, which I think is great while they're residents and beyond. And so absolutely, not as much anymore, but when I was first in practice, I'd go to my mentors all the time. Like, what would you do here? How would you do this? And people do that now with me. And I think it's amazing. And I hope that we instill that in our learners. And I think you can do that with a small program. The other thing is that, we have a really dedicated commitment to developing excellent clinical dermatologists, excellent clinical medical dermatologists. If you want to do an MD PhD, probably this is not the place for you. Not to say you couldn't do it, but it would be definitely more challenging than in a larger center like at the University of Toronto. But if you really want to have a solid clinical base, you will absolutely get that in Halifax.
That's super interesting. Something that I'm wondering is because you've mentioned that it's such a small kind of tailored program, do you find that in previous years the residents have kind of been able to tailor their residency experience and like creating maybe different elective opportunities or requesting to go to Northern Canada to do some placements there? Has that been possible?
We haven't had anyone request to do Northern Canadian placement. So for example, in Ottawa, they do have residents that go to Nunavut. And so something like that would be like, absolutely would support it. We haven't actually had that request. And you're right, when you do have a smaller group, you do have a little bit of that opportunity to tailor. Every year, our current program director, Ashley Sutherland, who's amazing, meets with the residents. They do a program review. She definitely takes their feedback to heart. Many of the things get implemented. Occasionally feedback comes back and you kind of say, I know you think this is a great idea, but these are the reasons that maybe it's not. And so it's a nice back and forth. The other thing is that for electives, people have done tons of different things. And so a lot of our group go to Ottawa to do electives, or Toronto or BC or America, and community-based electives and academic electives and pediatrics and contact derm and things like that. And I think that you do have that opportunity to make it a bit your own. Things change with competency by design. That's going to look a little bit different. And currently we're just in the cohort of our first CBD residences across the country, not just at Dal, going into their core derm years. And so, maybe if you ask again in 3 years, the answer may be, yeah, there's like really a lot of opportunity for tailoring. But I think it's always been a pro for us, for sure.
Well, that's great to hear that those kind of things are possible and have been done. On kind of a similar note, we would love to hear just in general, for our listeners, what your favorite and least favorite parts about dermatology are.
Yeah, this is a good interview question. But you know, and I think it's important to think about it, right? Because if you're choosing a career, you want to choose a career that you've thought about the pros and cons, and you have to be um happy about the pros, but you also have to be okay with the cons. And I think you don't have to love every single thing about whatever specialty you select. And so for me, I love the diversity of dermatology, and I think that means diversity of everything. So, you know, age, skin color, problem of skin, i.e., something minor, something major? Is it associated with something systemic? Is it not? You know, is the person complicated or not? Can you fix it or not? Can you manage it? I also think one of my favorite things right now is that we're in a therapeutic boom. And so there's so many options that we can give people that we didn't have when I first started practice. It's really nice to see that. Those are my favorite things. My least favorite thing, you know, I have a few and I could probably go on about this, but one of my least favorite things about dermatology, I think, is the impression that some of our colleagues that are not in dermatology have about what dermatology is. And I think that many people that have never experienced dermatologists, they haven't done a rotation, they haven't seen a dermatologist, they haven't had a family member see a dermatologist. They have an idea of what it means. And to a lot of them, it means slap on some cream and inject some Botox. And quite frankly, that's not at all true. And so, you know, it can be a challenge with medical colleagues for them to understand just how complex and helpful a dermatologist, like how complex the problems can be and how helpful a dermatologist can be in solving a lot of problems. Like you'll often get called late to say ICU. They've called every other specialty. They can't figure out what's happening. They finally call dermatology because they see something on the skin, and from the door you go, that's such and such. And they're shocked. Oh, how did you? I've never even heard of this thing. And you just think, you know, they've really undermined, or they've really um discounted what the specialty brings. And our organ is right there to be able to see. And so you can kind of do those doorway doctor house things, and people are shocked by it. And I think that is one of the worst things about dermatology. Just the, and I don't want to say lack of respect, because I don't, people are not disrespectful. I think they just don't really know what we do.
I think that's a super interesting answer to think about, and I really like how you phrased it. And I know it goes more deeper and serious than that, but one time someone told me, I'm not sure if it was a patient or a physician, who had only like good intentions, but they said, "Oh, dermatology. So if it's dry, you wet it, and if it's wet, you dry it." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, completely wrong."
Like, yeah, can you distill it down to that? No, but
I mean, because I mean, you just put Vaseline on everything, and the Vaseline has been a big player. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I remember somebody in internal medicine when I was deciding what I wanted to do, and they said, "Oh, derm, what a waste." And it was a terrible thing to say, not true. It didn't sway me. I'm not a very easily swayed person. But I do try to be really cognizant when I'm speaking to students now about whatever it is that they choose, to not say something negative, because like I also have no idea what many of our colleagues do. You know, I knew I didn't want to do something general because I really wanted to know a lot about some small area just to make myself feel better. But like, I don't know what a lot of other people do. And so I try not to say things like, what a waste, or why would you ruin your career with that? Because, you know, everything has pros and cons. And I think I'm probably not the only person that heard something like that when making a selection.
Yeah, I really like that perspective and that you do that, because especially like as a student, sometimes it can get so confusing because we only get to see so much or learn about so much. So you really do like hold those pieces of advice sometimes with a lot of weight, and can kind of,
Mm.
I would say, mix in a lot of confusion for the path. But
I
actually
mean,
kind of
I say sometimes I'm like, I might secretly be like an amazing urologist, but I just never got to experience it. So like, I haven't done that, but maybe that was my deep passion that I never, you know, got to see. So for sure, I think it's a huge thing.
and kind of just building off of like the previous stuff we've been talking about, since a lot of our listeners are primarily in medical school, I was wondering if you had like a piece of advice or something you wish you knew, or you could tell your past self in medical school, either about like your career or dermatology, or just kind of any advice.
Um, Yeah, be present and be keen. And I think that's all that's really important. People think that they need to have a certain level of knowledge. And my personal feeling about that is like you're doing a residency to learn the knowledge. And so you really shouldn't come in with an expectation of knowledge. But what you should come in with, or what I think people should think about on clinical rotations and clerkship, on electives and whatever, are, show up, be ready, be excited. There were definitely times where someone would be like, yeah, we're gonna go deliver a baby. And it's like 3 a.m, been up all night. And they're like, you want to go? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God. But I was like, yeah, what room? Because you can tell when people don't want to be there if they're really not wanting to be there. And I think like as a staff person, that bothers me more than anything else, because I'm like, you're getting this amazing opportunity to learn, and yeah, it's the night, or yeah, you've already seen 10 basal cells, but the reality is like there's a patient in front of you that is allowing you to be a part of their care and learn. And I think you have to take that and embrace it in some ways, and show that you're interested, because what we look for, I can speak for our group, are people that are like nice humans to be around. Like everybody in medical school is intellectually competent. We know that. Like you got into medical school, you are going through medical school. And when you look at people's reports, everyone's like, this is the best student. They're so smart. They're so great. And that's good. And so what you're really looking for is like, can I work with this person for 5 years? Do I want this person to be my colleague? Would I want this person to take care of my family member, loved one, friend, insert that in your mind. And so people that are like, you know, entitled or bored or um, arrogant or any of those things really don't fit that category for me. Now I'm speaking about me personally, and I think every program is a little bit different, but I think, like I said, be keen, be there. If someone says, do you want to come and see the such and such? The answer is yes. Yes, you do want to go see it. Even your head might be going, oh God, not again. But do it, because those are the kind of things that really make an impression, I think, on preceptors
That's
more than
great.
knowledge. Yeah.
And definitely something I'm going to take with me. I'm starting my clerkship. I just finished my second year, so I'm starting my clerkship in like August, September, and I just want to say yes to everything. Yeah, no matter how tired you get, because also the thing is too, all the specialties you don't pick, you might never get to see that again. So I kind of want
Mm,
to make sure I remember
yeah.
that.
And I think it's
Definitely.
important for people to have an open mind. And, like nothing used to bother me more than when people would come and go, well, I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon, so I don't really need to know this. And I was like, well, first of all, yes, you do, because you're going to be a doctor first. And then second of all, like, how do you know that's what you want to do? Because I was going to be an intensive care doctor and I'm not, obviously. So I think having an open mind about everything, and not always applying it to some like decision you've already kind of made in your head, will make your experience a lot better. Like I said, I knew I didn't want to be an obstetrician, but I didn't think I couldn't learn anything from the awesome teachers that I had in OB and GYN. So,
That's a really great perspective, and I like hearing both of you share a little bit about that. I actually, at MAC in our third year, we are still doing our core rotations with electives, and I just started my OB rotation, and we saw a patient with lichen sclerosis on the vulva
mhm.
rotation, and I was like, wow, like, still doing derm, even though I'm on OB-GYN. So that was a pleasant surprise, but even without that, I think someone once told me that they didn't realize that the last time they delivered a baby was the last time they were ever gonna be in delivery like that, or when they were like pulling apart a kneecap to do a knee replacement, they didn't realize that was the last time they would ever do that. So kind of like what Emma was saying, kind of cool to think of it that way, like you might never
Mhm.
touch a kneecap again.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next question, something that we found super interesting is your presence and your role within medical education in general, but also in kind of breaking down the misinformation and addressing misinformation in the public. We saw that you had a recent appearance on CBC to address the anti-sunscreen trends online, which we think is super cool because we think that like a lot of us are online anyways.
Mhm.
So any advice to medical students or residents about having an online presence and trying to advocate for patients through social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is a blessing and a curse. And I think, so it's really important to be cognizant of what you put online. the same thing I tell my kids. I'm like, whatever is online forever. If you think it's gone, great for you, but it's not. So like, so I think that some things that are not controversial and not questionable are really easy things to talk about. Sun safety, the highest UV is in the middle of the day. You should sit in the shade if you can. You should wear sun protection. That can look like sunscreen. That can look like clothes. That can look like a hat. Don't forget sunglasses. These are things that are just true. And so they're really not controversial, and you're not going to get yourself into any hot water. I think that there is an opportunity for people in medicine to create content that is accurate. I think it can be a hard place to be, though. People are a little um bold online. People say things that they would never say to somebody's face. Maybe they would, probably not. And so I think, if you want to go down the social media line, there's probably some people that you can talk to that are far better versed than me, but I think you have to have a bit of a thick skin. I think you want to say things that are not particularly controversial, and then, not really and I don't mean that in a way that you should avoid controversial topics. I just mean the other thing is, if you're just you. So if I'm just Kerri online, and I don't associate it with anything to do with my, my medical school or my residency or my university that I work with now, or the health authority, and I say whatever I want, okay, great. But as soon as you attach that to, like, I'm a medical student at Mac, or I'm a medical student at Western, or I'm a dermatology resident at such and such, suddenly you're almost speaking on behalf of that group, whether it's sanctioned or not. And so, this is why I think it's in those cases better to kind of just be like relatively neutral with information. But there's a lot of really good physicians on, like, Twitter, well, X, and Insta and TikTok that do break down some of the misinformation. I think it's important that people acknowledge, break down misinformation, but it's a bit of like, it's a little tricky at times. So yeah, I just say do it, but be cautious, and just think to yourself, like, would I say this out loud? And this seems like maybe a weird way to be, but sometimes if I'm thinking, should I do this or should I say this? Then I think to myself, what if it was on the front page of the National Post? Like, would I feel okay about it? And if the answer is yes, okay, yeah, no problem. If I'm like, I probably wouldn't want that out there, then I think twice about what I'm about to say or write down in perpetuity on the internet.
Yeah, there's definitely like that very sensitive line to cross with social media. What I think is cool is that more and more on Instagram, there's organizations like Melanoma Canada and the Eczema Society, which have like a whole team putting out information for patients. So sometimes it's easier to even go and like repost something or share something through them and have that kind of evidence-based data already there,
Yeah.
rather than stepping into the fire by yourself, maybe.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to amplify messages that are accurate. And I think there's like lots of information that you can bring that's accurate. And some of the nicer things are that places are doing, they'll have like a tag, like this is not accurate, or like fact checking type of stuff. And I think that's good to have as well. I think part of the problem is that people that use, TikTok as their news source, which I heard today on the radio, that a lot of people probably your age do that, not oldies like me, but I think also, getting more content in there that's accurate, that drives algorithms towards accurate content, is important too, because otherwise people are down this rabbit hole and they just, like, they don't get fed anything else. So yeah.
I think that all makes sense. And then the next thing I wanted to ask you was, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit if there's any specific current gaps in dermatology you think in either practice or research that you're hoping maybe gets addressed in the future, or that you think the field's going to move towards in the coming years.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's always gaps, especially if you look at a specialty that has, over 1,000 conditions. Many of them are orphaned, if you will, or they just don't have research and pipeline behind them. I do think it's really exciting that a lot of the research and development for newer molecules, like small molecules, biologics, are often used off label, and then you'll kind of be like, actually, this works. And if you think even just about the propranolol story in infantile hemangiomas, like, this is a drug we've had for a really long time. A couple of people were like, hey, wait a second, this seems to work for this. And now, when I was a resident, it was the first time we put someone on here in our center, and now it's like standard of care. And so, I think there's a lot of clinical gaps in areas where there aren't a billion people that have the condition. So, I think there's places there. I think the other big gap, especially when we look at Canada, is access to dermatologic care, which, is a complicated topic that could probably be an entire podcast series. But, we've got a large land mass with people in various small locations and then other people farther away. And we don't train a ton of people every year, right? And dermatologists probably only see 30% of the skin disease in Canada. Most of it's primary care physicians and other primary care healthcare providers. And so, I think we do certainly have a gap in access that using novel things like telemedicine, store and forward, ways that we can try to address some of those gaps is something that we really need to do in the next, 5 to 10 years for equitable care for patients.
I think that is something that I've also thought about a lot is just, there's so much research happening with actual medicine, but then access is a big thing as well. And it was even seeing the Indigenous Summit and the conferences come out and just seeing how we have almost no research on our own Indigenous population in Canada and the unique skin presentations. I think that's a super big area that kind of parallels that, not even to mention just access to rural healthcare. But I agree, it's kind of exciting seeing that you could just kind of start anywhere and really deep dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so our last question before we move on to our rapid fire question is we always just like to let our guest kind of have the floor about any piece of advice they would like to share to any of our listeners currently pursuing the path, just any last words of wisdom.
Yeah, okay. Again, I could soapbox this, but one of the big things that I think is important is if you think you want to do dermatology, try it. Do electives in your place and away. I will say that there was a period of time, very brief period of time, medical school, where I thought maybe I want to be a plastic surgeon. And that was really because our local team at the time were awesome and I had such a great time and it was amazing. And then I went and did one elective away and it was terrible. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. This is not for me. I am not interested in this at all. And so, I think and a lot of times people say, well, you kind of gravitate to people that you like and they tend to be in your specialty. And I think that goes for derm now that I'm in it, but, and probably some crossovers to plastics, but I think number one, test it out locally. And if you're able to go somewhere, like if that's within your ability, great. And the other thing is like, there have been people over the years that select dermatology because they're like, oh, this seems like a nice specialty and it's like pretty decent hours once you're done. And yes, but if you do not like the skin and you do not have a passion for reading about 1,300 skin diseases and reading a lot, don't do it. Because yes, it's great at the end. And yes, you have all these great lifestyle things and you can work as much as you want, blah, blah, blah. But like, you got to get there first. And the getting there would be a real challenge if you weren't interested in actual dermatology. And so, I always tell people like, don't get swayed by the glitzy dermatology TikTok people that you're like, they have a great life. Yeah, they do. But like, it's definitely a heavy duty reading, learning, time commitment about a very specific area of medicine. So if you like it, embrace it, go for it, test it out. It's a great specialty. I wouldn't change anything in my own career, but you really do want to like it. So that's the thing I always give advice to. Don't just pick it because it looks good. It looks good.
I love that. And that's a really funny story. And Emma knows when I started clerkship, I did psychiatry quite early on. And I was like, wow, I love this. And I realized I really just love my preceptor because I just wanted to be around her all the time and chat about things. And then as I did other specialties and even family medicine, I realized the psychiatry part of it, you can really counsel patients in a lot of specialties, including derm with, how the comorbidities present. So that's funny. I agree that sometimes the people really make you step back and you're like, wait, do I like this or do I like the person?
Absolutely. Yep, for sure.
All right, so now we're going to transition to our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
This is just kind of the fun way to end the episode and have people get to know you a little bit better outside of medicine. So the first thing that I wanted to ask is, what's your favorite thing to do on a day off or kind of nice sunny day? Where can we find you?
I know what I should say, but the short answer is like I should be doing something active and productive.
Okay.
But that's when I like to just like do nothing. But you'd probably actually find me at my cottage, which is on the North Shore of Nova Scotia, and I would be doing the ride-on lawnmower for 2 to 3 hours a week. That's where you would find me.
I love that. Is that the one that you're just like driving, or is it, or do you
Yes,
pedal?
I have a
Okay.
zero turn, so you can really, I mow about 2 acres, and it is quite relaxing because no one can talk to me and I can't hear my phone, so it's kind of a nice time.
It's a very unique answer.
And then our second question is, we were wondering if you had a favorite summer snack, or it doesn't have to be season specific. It could just be a favorite snack in general if it's not a summer snack.
If you had asked me a decade ago, I'd say anything chocolate, but somehow after I was pregnant with my first son, everything turned salty, and salt and vinegar chips, and shout out to the New Brunswick company Covered Bridge, are my absolute favorite year-round snack.
Okay, I love salt and vinegar. Fair enough.
Covered Bridge. Try it.
Okay, our last question. So, and you can take this as lightheartedly or as seriously as you like. What dermatology or medical term do you think would make a good name for a pet? Asking for a friend.
Okay. Hmm. Good name for a pet in dermatology. Oh, wow, that's a great question.
Thank you. And I have one sitting in my mind, so I'm going to challenge you with it. So we'll see.
Okay. Okay, let me think about this. I feel like, like an Irish setter could be called Red Rivulet, which is like a sign of Haley Haley, and then I called him Red for short.
Oh,
So
and it would be a red poodle.
yeah, or an Irish
Or
setter.
the Irish one you said. Okay,
Yeah,
okay, that's true. Because it could also be like the Rhodesian Ridgeback is the red too. I like it. Very
yeah.
nice. When I was on my anesthesiology rotation, this came to mind. I thought Valecula was a really good one. You call it Val for short. And you're like, oh, who's this? This is Val, short for Valecula. That little space in your behind your epiglottis or whatever. So
I like it. I
that's how
like
this
it.
question came about.
Very, very nice. I mean, there's so many words in Derm that you could probably, name a pet with, but
Yeah, I think that's the next big TikTok trend. I'm predicting it in social media.
I think you're onto something.
I appreciate that. Okay. Well, on that note, I wanted to say a huge thank you to you, Dr. Purdy, for taking the time and spending your evening with us. We are so appreciative of all your insights and words of wisdom. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you want to keep up with our podcast, offer any feedback, or know when we post our next episode, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Skin Curriculum, or visit our website at www.skincurriculum.com. Otherwise, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Dose of Derm, and we hope you all take care.